Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines. My name is Jamal Thomas. My co-host Shane Stranahan, who he usually hangs here, does not necessarily feel well, so let's give him all a hopefully that he gets well soon. Joining us though, as I mentioned before, we're talking about Julian Assange and the pravity of what's taking place in regards to him. We have Alexander Mercouris with us, editor-in-chief at the Duran. Alexander, welcome to the show.
Delighted to be with you again today.
Absolutely. So I wanted to talk, starting off with Assange. Basically, the trial ended yesterday on October 1st. And like I said, they're going to have to put in the defense arguments. The prosecution is going to get his say, and then the judge is basically going to give her say, I think January 4th, if I'm not mistaken. After the prosecution gives theirs, there's going to be a reply by the defense for 72 hours. Can you give us a heads up on this trial? Like, you've been there, you're in the UK. Has there been any news, or how has the news in the UK treated this particular trial or regarded this trial? Has this been pursuing its way along?
The news media in the UK has largely ignored this trial. There's been a flurry of interest in the last few days, related principally to the evidence from UC Global. This is this security company that was spying on Assange in the embassy, being paid to do it by Sheldon Adelson and reporting its findings to the US government. That has attracted interest, and there's been some interest also about the fact that there were apparently even talks of murdering Assange. So that's obviously a news or at a certain level, but even that has got into the sort of back pages. The media has largely ignored the hearing, but the public, the British public, which has its own sources of information, has very, very gradually started to take a greater interest. And there was a substantial crowd outside the court. Interestingly enough, there were a lot more young people than usual. I mean, up to now, the student community and young adults have not really been very interested in the case, but they seem to be coming out more now. And the other thing that was really very, very remarkable is that lots of cars drive past the Central Criminal Court where this hearing is being held. And of course, they do so regularly on everyday business. And they were busy honking out their horns in support of Assange. And this has apparently been happening now for several days as the hearing has come to an end. So there is a shift in public opinion, and it's becoming both more engaged in the case and more sympathetic to Assange as information about the trial has begun to dribble out. Now, you're quite right in saying that it ended yesterday. Much of the evidence is going to be read only by the judge in writing. You can find witness statements which are posted on the internet. The judge has given a very elaborate timetable of defense submissions, prosecution responses, defense responses, and then the final judgment will be on the 4th of January. All of this is to take place in writing. But I think most of the people who have followed the trial closely, and I should say I was actually physically present on the last day, have come to the clear view that the defense, in other words, Assange's lawyers, have won comprehensively the actual battles on the evidence and on the law. And one of the things that seems to have been worked very strongly in their favor is that the US government has provided 3 different indictments at different times. And they don't seem to have clarified precisely what the case against Assange any longer is. And the judge, and I was there, I heard her say this, is clearly irritated by that. And she's given a direction that the US government must clarify the precise nature of the charges that Assange is facing by Monday. Now, just think about that for a moment. We've just had a whole 4-week trial.
Wait. The United States
Yeah.
government went through Herculean effort to basically come up with a cockamamie idea or scheme to get Assange shipped
Yeah.
back to the U.S. for prosecution for something,
Yeah.
meaning universal jurisdiction, but not a First Amendment affirmative defense for it. That's bizarre. We can go after you, but you can't use our defenses for it. And on top of that,
Exactly.
the judge, after all of this, after all of these years, 7 years, with a sneaky amendment behind the British, the thing of getting him into courts, all of those years, and right now at the end of this trial, are you telling me that the United States, the judge is basically saying you need to come up with why you're trying to get him? That's profound.
That's exactly right. We've just had a 4-week trial. We still don't know what the charges are. I mean, we're expecting. I've never known anything like this to happen before. I mean, it really is the world turned upside down. I mean, it's Alice in.
Wait, Alexander, I thought that the charges had to do with espionage. Like there were like 17 charges that the U.S. kind of came up with.
Yeah. So, firstly, we had 3 indictments. The first indictment didn't say anything about espionage. It was all about interfering with a computer, helping a Manning interfere with a computer. Then they brought in the second indictment, which was all about espionage. The reason they did that, by the way, was because the British made it very clear that they wouldn't extradite on the first indictment because it was too minor an offence and it wasn't even clear that there was an offence there. So then they brought in the Espionage Act indictment, which with the 17 charges. The problem is that is a very political charge, and Britain supposedly doesn't extradite people on political charges. And so just before the trial, they brought a third indictment in which they said, well, you know, we still maintain he should be extradited on the Espionage Act, but he's also been involved with computer hacking, and he's done some bad things in Iceland, not in the US note, and we've got evidence from a key witness of that, to all of that. That witness, by the way, is a fraudster, a convicted fraudster, and an FBI informant, but never mind. So they brought in this next indictment. So the judges asked, look, are you saying that all this additional material about the hacking and the events in Iceland is intended to be a crime that you're alleging Assange committed? Tell us what this crime is and tell us whether it forms part of your extradition request. And they've been told to do this by Monday. So we've had a whole hearing, 4 weeks of a hearing, and we still don't know yet exactly why the US says it wants to extradite Assange.
And 52 weeks in jail, by the way. More than 52 weeks.
Yeah.
When his time was up, they kept him in jail. And so it's like
Yeah.
7 years in an embassy, 52 weeks more in the jail. And right now, you have this weird situation where the judge is like, look, you guys need to tell us why you're trying to charge him. That's a profound.
Yeah. I've never heard anything so crazy in my life. And these long years that he was in the embassy, the UN agencies have said that is arbitrary detention,
Yes.
which is a human rights violation. And the conditions under which Assange has been held amount to psychological torture. So he's been tortured. He's been held in arbitrary detention. And as of now, when we are speaking, the US has still not clarified precisely what charge he would be facing if he was sent to the United States. I mean, it's absolutely mad.
Alexander, let me ask you this. Do you think, just over the context of this trial, I've been following, there's a gentleman on Twitter that's been giving a daily recap of what's been taken on. I mean, it's like a virtual trial or whatever. Julian Assange has been sitting in a box and not being able to have really good communications with this lawyer, not in the best of health, like clearly not in the best of health. And yet, the trial continues. Do you think...
Well, that's entirely right.
Well, wait, based on your observations, like that you've been watching this also. I mean, you follow politics. You're, like a political like myself. Do you think it's been a fair trial? And do you think that he could get a fair trial in the context of everything else and the powers that actually want to get their hands on him in the United States, despite British law, despite all of the anomalies associated with the trial? Ultimately, do you think it was fair? And do you think the result would be something that's favorable to Assange?
Right. Right. Firstly, on the American case, we had overwhelming testimony during the trial in England that he would not get a fair trial in the US. About the proceedings in England, it is extremely worrying that he was refused bail. That is astonishing to me. He should certainly have been granted bail. There was no reason why he should not be granted bail. And I have to say, like many people, I felt that right at the beginning that the judge in this case was extremely hostile to him and bending over backwards to assist the US and the Crown Prosecution Service, the British Crown Prosecution Service. So in that respect, I don't think he was getting a fair trial. The only thing I'm going to say is this. Over the course of the hearing, and many people have noticed this, the judge's attitude began to change. And I think what began to annoy her increasingly was the US's repeated changes of position, their inability to say clearly what the case is, and of course, the sheer mountain of evidence that was being produced about the real reasons why the US wants him to be taken to the US, that he has exposed war crimes. And the judge's attitude was starting to shift over the course of the trial. I have to say, I still think she's going to find against him. I think the political pressure is enormous. Political pressure makes a fair trial impossible. So I think she's still going to decide to extradite him, but he has rights of appeal to the High Court and to the Supreme Court. And I think based on what happened in this hearing, I think the prospects of that ought to be good.
So wait, after the extradition hearing, he still has additional resources where he can go. That's actually a pretty good point. So what happens if he is convicted? There's about 30 seconds, and we're going to go to the next break. But do you know, like, if he's convicted here, what happens from here on out?
Yeah. He appeals to the High Court, which is the most senior court in Britain, and the judges there are far more experienced and far more erudite in the law and far more independent of the political system than the judge who heard this case. So it'd be a completely different type of hearing on legal points, and I would have thought there he would have very good prospects of success.
I see what you mean. The High Court is a fair trial just because the political pressure doesn't necessarily weigh as much on it.
That's exactly right.
Okay, let's do this. Let's go to a break, and we'll be back because I really want to get into Brexit stuff. I've been fascinated by UK politics recently, so I am so glad you could join me. We're talking to Alexander Mercouris, Editor-in-Chief at the Duran. We will be back in a moment. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan.